The Sahara Desert, the world's largest desert, a hell spanning approximately 9 million square kilometers, known for its scorching heat reaching 55 degrees Celsius during the day and freezing cold at night. Some regions go decades without rain. Winds create sandstorms at speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour, making it impossible to see, erasing all sense of direction. This is an arena where the limits of survival are tested, where nature displays its most merciless face. So, what would you do if you got lost in this hell? This is the incredible true story of a man who risked his life to find the answer to that question. Mauro Prosperi, April 1994. Mauro Prosperi, 13 years old, a former Italian athlete and police officer. Disciplined, ambitious, and a character who never gave up on what he set his mind to. He had a family. He seemed to be living a normal, ordinary life with his wife and children. That was until he decided to face the greatest challenge of his life. This challenge was the legendary Marathon des Sables, or Marathon of the Sands, held in the Sahara Desert. A 250-kilometer course spread over 6 days in an ultramarathon format, where participants carried all their food, clothing, and equipment on their backs, with the organization providing only limited water and emergency medical assistance. One of the world's toughest races. Mauro's wife vehemently opposed this idea. The risks were enormous. In fact, the race registration form asked participants this question: if you die, where do you want us to send your body? Such a serious warning was the clearest indication that everything could be a matter of life and death. But Mauro was determined. He trusted his tough character and athletic background. He entered an intense preparation period. Every single day, without exception, he ran 40 kilometers. But his training wasn't just about building physical endurance. He deliberately began drinking less water, consciously depriving his body to prepare it for the desert's brutal thirst. His body needed to learn how to function with minimal hydration. His muscles needed to adapt to extreme dehydration. Every training session was a simulation of the hell that awaited him. Spoiler alert, this preparation would give him an endurance he would desperately need in the days to come. Finally, after months of grueling preparation, he gathered the necessary equipment and set off for Morocco, into the heart of the Sahara. The calendar showed April 1994. The marathon was about to begin. Hundreds of runners from around the world gathered at the starting line, each one knowing they were about to embark on one of the most dangerous athletic challenges on Earth. The first 3 days of the race went brilliantly for Mauro. He had covered approximately 100 kilometers and risen to 4th place in the overall standings. His training was paying off. He ran in the scorching heat during the day, his body moving like a well-oiled machine through the endless dunes. He refreshed his water supply at specific stations scattered along the route, and rested at camp areas at night alongside other competitors. There was camaraderie among the runners, stories shared around small fires, the sense of collective challenge binding them together. Everything was going according to plan. Mauro felt strong, confident, even invincible. Until the 4th day, when they reached the longest and most challenging stage of the course. The weather was windier than normal in the morning hours. Experienced desert guides noticed the unusual atmospheric pressure, the way the air felt heavy and ominous. But the race continued. Mauro had passed the checkpoints and continued running alone, having pulled ahead of a group of slower runners. The temperature had reached 46 degrees Celsius. The sun was burning the sands beneath his feet. His shoes were hot, his skin was baking, but he pushed forward. Then movement began on the horizon. Small sand dunes were shifting, changing shape as if the desert itself was coming alive. And then he saw it. A massive sandstorm advancing toward him, like a towering yellow wall, hundreds of feet high, consuming everything in its path. It was nature's fury in its purest, most terrifying form. A sudden, violent, blinding storm. The wind howled with a deafening roar, hurling sand grains like thousands of tiny needles into his face. He tried to cover his eyes, his mouth, but the sand found every opening. The surroundings became filled with dust and debris. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Even breathing had turned into torture. Every breath brought sand into his lungs, making him cough and gasp. The organization advised staying put and taking cover in such situations. But in the middle of the Sahara, there was no tree, no rock, no shelter to take cover behind. The landscape was completely flat, offering no protection whatsoever. Your only shelter was your own body. Mauro crouched to the ground repeatedly, curling into a ball, turning his back to the wind, trying desperately to protect himself from the relentless assault of sand. He pulled his shirt over his face, wrapped his arms around his head. But the storm was so violent, so overwhelmingly powerful, that the sands nearly buried him each time. He could feel the weight of the sand accumulating on his back, threatening to entomb him alive. As he tried to get up and move forward, his sense of direction was completely erased. North, south, east, west, all meaningless concepts now. The storm had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien world. After the storm passed, the dunes had shifted entirely. Landmarks that existed hours before were gone. Markers carefully placed by race organizers were buried deep beneath fresh layers of sand. Nothing familiar remained. The desert had been completely rearranged, as if shuffled by the hands of a cruel god. When this hellish storm, which lasted a punishing 8 hours, finally subsided, Mauro was completely lost. The surroundings were pitch black. Night had fallen during the storm, and now he stood in absolute darkness, alone, disoriented, with no idea which direction to go. He had no choice but to stay where he was and wait for the weather to clear, hoping that dawn would bring clarity and direction. When morning finally came, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red, Mauro was still thinking about the race competition. His athlete's mindset kicked in immediately. He wanted to make up for lost time, to maintain his position in the rankings. He was 4th place before the storm. Surely he could regain that position. He wasn't yet fully aware of the severity of the situation, the mortal danger he was truly in. His competitive nature clouded his judgment. He started running in the direction he thought was correct, following what he believed were the correct landmarks. Now he was truly alone. There was no race marker ahead, no competitor on the horizon, no signs of human presence anywhere. The usual sounds of other runners, the encouraging shouts, the sense of collective endeavor, all gone. All he had left was his backpack, a small amount of dry food that would be useless without water, a knife, a sleeping bag, and water that was about to run out. His supplies were measured for a race with regular checkpoints, not for survival in the open desert. At first, he didn't panic. He was an experienced athlete, a trained police officer. He thought logically, rationally. Sooner or later, I'll run into someone, he told himself. The race organizers will find me. There are helicopters, search teams. I just need to stay calm and keep moving. But he had no idea that in a few days, driven to the absolute brink of human endurance, he would try to take his own life out of the complete and utter desperation. Thirst was now the primary enemy, more dangerous than the heat, more threatening than the isolation. It consumed his thoughts. Dry foods couldn't be consumed without water. They would only dehydrate him further. Where was the nearest water station? Had he left it behind, or was it ahead? Was he even going in the right direction? He didn't know. The uncertainty was maddening. The survival plan was simple, primitive, the kind of basic strategy humans have used for thousands of years. Walk early in the morning when the temperature is bearable. At noon, when the sun is directly overhead and the heat becomes lethal, find any shade available and rest, conserving energy and moisture. Walk again in the late afternoon as the sun begins to descend. Sleep when night falls and the desert becomes freezing cold. This was the desert's merciless cycle, and Mauro was now trapped in it. 2 days after getting lost, hope appeared on the horizon. The distinct sound of a helicopter cutting through the desert air. His heart leaped. Salvation. Mauro frantically tried to make himself visible, waving his arms, jumping, screaming, even though they couldn't possibly hear him. He fired the mini signal flare from his bag, the one emergency tool he had for exactly this situation. The flare shot into the air with a small pop, but unfortunately, because it was broad daylight and the flare was weak and barely visible against the bright desert sky, the helicopter didn't notice him. It flew past, disappearing into the distance. Hope, which had surged so suddenly and powerfully in his chest, vanished among the endless sands. The despair that followed was crushing. On the third day of being lost, when dehydration was beginning to affect his mind and body seriously, he miraculously saw structures on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a cruel trick played by his deteriorating mind. But as he approached, they became real, solid. These were what the Bedouins called marabouts, small shrines and shelters built centuries ago, now completely abandoned but still standing against the elements. It was a place sheltered from the sun, with walls that had once been sacred. For Mauro, it represented a chance, however slim, to survive another day. Mauro was incredibly thirsty. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his tongue swollen, he could barely swallow. Every breath was painful. His body was shutting down from dehydration. He had only one option to survive, one horrifying choice that no rational person would ever want to make. The small bats living in the niches and crevices of the marabout's walls. Yes, you heard that right. Bats. We don't want to give too many details because it's genuinely disturbing, but Mauro, driven by the most primal survival instinct, caught as many bats as he could grab in the darkness. With trembling hands operating purely on instinct, he used their blood to hydrate himself. This was an instinctive survival struggle that carried serious infection risks. Rabies, diseases, bacteria. But when you're dying of thirst, such considerations become meaningless. At least he had managed to somewhat quench his desperate thirst and eat his remaining dry foods, which he could now swallow. For the next 3 days in this abandoned shrine, he struggled to cling to life while wrestling with bats in the darkness. It was psychological torture, the isolation, the silence, the waiting. But no one came. No one went. No rescue teams appeared on the horizon. No helicopters returned. Because unknowingly, he had walked in the completely opposite direction of the race route, almost toward the Algerian border, covering distances that seemed impossible for a lost person to travel. Those searching for him, the race organizers and rescue teams, thought it was absolutely impossible for him to have survived traveling that far. They were looking in other areas, closer to where he should have been, where logic said he had to be. Despair was slowly taking over his mind like a dark poison. He remembered the faces of his wife and children with heartbreaking clarity. Every detail, the way his wife smiled, the sound of his children's laughter. He hadn't listened to them about this race, had dismissed their concerns as excessive worry. Now he was experiencing the heavy, unbearable guilt of leaving them fatherless and without a husband. Even worse, and this thought tormented him endlessly. According to Italian law, if his body wasn't found, it would take 10 years for him to be officially declared dead. His family would remain in uncertainty and financial hardship for 10 years, unable to access insurance, unable to move forward with their lives, trapped in bureaucratic limbo. This thought was unbearable. These thoughts pushed him to a terrible decision: suicide. With a piece of charcoal he found in the shrine, his hands shaking, he wrote an apology to his family on the wall. Words of love, regret, sorrow. Then, with tears streaming down his face, he drew the knife he had been carrying across his wrist. The pain was sharp, immediate. Then he lay down silently in the darkness. and began waiting for death to take him, hoping it would be quick. Morning came, but Mauro hadn't died. As a reaction of his incredibly dehydrated body, his blood had become extremely concentrated and viscous, almost thick like syrup, and had clotted almost immediately. This biological response, this quirk of extreme dehydration, unknowingly saved his life. The cut wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, and his blood quickly clotted, stopping the bleeding before he could lose a dangerous amount. When Mauro opened his eyes and realized he was still breathing, still alive, it hit him like a revelation. This was a second chance given to him, a message from the universe or fate or God. Since he had risked death and failed, perhaps destiny had another plan for him. Perhaps he was meant to survive this ordeal. On the 7th day of being lost, with renewed determination born from surviving his suicide attempt, he set out with one last effort. He had nothing left to lose now. His body had become skin and bones, every rib visible, his face gaunt and skeletal. His energy was about to run out completely. But his instincts, some deep animal part of his brain, guided him towards small clouds he saw on the horizon. Clouds meant moisture. There might be an oasis in that direction, water, life. After an exhausting, agonizing walk of approximately 10 to 12 hours, dragging one foot in front of the other, a scene appeared that he was absolutely sure wasn't a hallucination this time. A few dried palm trees, their fronds brown and dead, but unmistakably real. Hope had sprouted again in his chest. As the weather began to darken, as the sun finally set, he reached a small pool of water. Water. The elixir of life he had been longing for, dreaming about, hallucinating about for days. He fell to his knees at the edge, almost weeping. But even in his desperate state, he was mindful of the dangers of drinking too much water too quickly into a severely dehydrated body. It could cause fatal complications, cellular damage, organ failure. For a full 6-7 hours, showing incredible discipline and willpower, he tried to bring his body back to life by drinking water sip by tiny sip, patiently allowing his cells to slowly rehydrate. And he succeeded. He could feel life flowing back into him. Even more incredibly, in the wet sand next to the water, he saw human footprints, fresh footprints. He wasn't alone. Other people were here. The next morning, as he prepared to follow the footprints with renewed energy, he noticed someone watching him from a distance. A young Berber girl, probably a shepherd, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity at this strange skeletal man. Although she moved away in fear when he tried to approach, Mauro followed her and her goats from a respectful distance, and soon reached a small Berber camp with tents and people and civilization. He had finally reached people. He was saved. But the story wasn't over yet. Mauro had unknowingly crossed the international border from Morocco to Algeria during his wandering. The villagers who found him were frightened by this exhausted, emaciated foreign man who appeared like a ghost from the desert. They notified the authorities immediately. Those who came weren't race organizers or Moroccan officials, but Algerian soldiers in military vehicles. They didn't initially believe Mauro's story about getting lost while running a marathon in the desert. It sounded absurd, impossible. They suspected him of being a smuggler, a spy, something illegal. They blindfolded him and took him to a military base for questioning. Fortunately, news had been circulating on both sides of the border about a marathon runner who had gone missing. The information matched. The pieces fell into place. Mauro Prosperi was officially rescued. Mauro Prosperi had stayed alone in the Sahara Desert for a total of 9 days, walking approximately 300 kilometers through some of the harshest terrain on Earth, and accomplishing what many considered impossible. When he was finally rescued and examined by doctors, he had lost 16 kilograms, about 30 pounds of body weight. His liver and kidneys had suffered serious damage from extreme dehydration. He would need to go through a treatment and recovery process lasting a full 2 years to fully heal. But he was alive. Against all odds, against all probability, he had returned from the brink of death and reunited with his family. The desert that had led him to death had also been the ultimate test that brought him back from death, forging him into something stronger. This story was an unforgettable epic showing the limits of human spirit's resilience, the power of survival instinct, and yes, a bit of extraordinary luck. As Dar Stories, we thank you for walking with us through every detail of this incredible survival story. Which moment in Mauro's journey affected you the most? Do you think the decision he made in that marabou was right? Or did the clotted blood give him a second chance purely by luck? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments. Your likes and comments provide us with the greatest motivation to produce such in-depth, compelling content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Until we meet again in the next video with another extraordinary story hidden in the darkness of history, take care of yourselves. Stories. Stories beyond history, humanity, and resilience.